And again, over to you, Zeno.
Thank you. So, system change, not climate change. This catchphrase has been around for more than 10 years and has probably got more known in 2018 and 2019 due to the massive movements that have been surging all around the world. The idea that something systematic has to change in order to prevent an even more drastic climate change is even older. I think many of us refer to the 1973 Club of Rome report entitled Limits to Growth. But there's this entire thinking about the environmental damage caused by economic activity since the 18th, 19th centuries. Climate change can be analyzed from a whole set of perspectives and levels. To me, the idea of it being a threefold crisis, a crisis of biodiversity, a crisis caused by emissions and by the pollution of the environment, has been extremely helpful and simple. But I think that we'll be spending more time today talking about and reflecting on the system change part of the catchphrase. You already see I like to pose fundamental questions. So what exactly is the system and how do we change it?
Marco, yeah.
Marco, do you want to say something?
Yeah.
Yes.
You, Tim?
Hello.
So to provide some material for our discussion, I'd answer the what's the system question shortly by the ongoing commodification of the environment, inserting in processes of capital accumulation. All of our 5 panelists today will be able to nuance this and to add other dimensions to it. For instance, is the system change problem at least partially different in the global south than in the global north, partially different as well in rural areas than in urban spaces? You may have noticed that this is a youth panel, so we also have to ask ourselves, how can we reach more young people with this message? How do we youth climate movements relate to old social movements and political parties? How can we show that climate justice is not climate justice without social justice? With whom do we collaborate and with whom do we refuse to do so, maybe? As we've been struggling with COVID-19 for nearly a year now, we have to ask ourselves as well, how do we continue our struggles in this extremely difficult situation? And what do we do to prevent isolation among young people as well, and to strengthen collaborative action? So we've got about 90 minutes to address all of these different questions and maybe even more. We've got a first round in which all of you 5 will speak for around 7 minutes. Obviously, Thomas and Josef will share 7 minutes, and then we'll open the debate among us and as well address questions from people that are listening this conversation. I hope that everything is well on the technical level. So I'll introduce our panelists one by one. Perfect, Paco, thank you. And I'll start with Archana, as she will be the first to speak. So, and I hope that I pronounce your name well. Archana is an environmentalist activist from the state of Odisha in the northeast of India. She belongs to the Karya tribe and is as such involved with the National Adivasi Alliance, Adivasi being the Indian name for tribe or indigenous people. In 2020, Archana has been selected as one of the 7 members of the Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change established by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres. So without further ado, I give you 7 minutes, maybe a bit more, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zeno, and Johar to one and all present here. It's a pleasure to be here and deliberating and interacting with my fellow colleagues, those who are here on system change and not climate change. So, the first perspective which I would like to emphasize, that I coming from an area which is highly an extractive the extractive developmental projects area. So if I talk about my experience, like I have personally experienced then 10 years down the lane when I was in school, when we used to go to school in school bus, the things where there was a lot of greeneries around us. But now when I see entire area, what I see is all industrialization and all factories coming up in the areas. The roads have been enlarged, like the 2 lanes have become 4 lanes road transportation. And thereby, one of the very prominent or the important question which keeps pushing me or which makes me work towards climate change or climate action is that the indigenous and the local communities over the years have been leading an eco-friendly way of living with the nature. So it's not indigenous people and nature is a different thing, but for us indigenous people and nature is the same. Like my name is Archana Soreng. The meaning of my surname, that is Soreng, in my own Khadia tribe, the language which we speak means rock, which means that we are so connected with nature that even our name is embedded with nature. And that is why we draw our identity from nature. Having said that, because our area is so much uh, imposition of extractive developmental projects, what has happened over the years in our locality or in the state from where I come, and I echo this also of the various tribal areas from India, is that most of the states in India have a high imposition of the extractive developmental projects, specifically where the indigenous communities are there. Now I want to build a relationship or an observation of my research is that because of extractive developmental projects, there has been displacement, there has been migration of the indigenous and local communities. And because of displacement and migration and land grabbing, there has been high inflow of other communities in the lands of indigenous areas because the minings and the factories has set up. This has led to and making the indigenous peoples feel that their culture and traditions are very much inferior, and imposition of the patterns of globalization and westernization. And also because the entire way of living, the livelihood, the sustainable livelihood as it is distorted because land is snatched away from them. Most of the community members, at the cost of their own identity, have also moved out of their areas, and those who are there, many are in given jobs in the very low level area, which is at the cost of their own health. And certain other communities are still practicing the traditional knowledge and practices. Now I bring down to a situation that because of migration, the indigenous communities, those who have been away from their ancestor lands, and because of these jobs which are being given to the indigenous communities, those who are in the local areas who have health issues, there is a situation where is a generational gap, or there is a situation wherein the transition of the traditional knowledge and practices of the indigenous communities of biodiversity conservation, of forest protection, and of climate action has cut off because of this entire investment and the developmental projects. Now I bring down to a situation that because of this intergenerational because of gap of this intergenerational dialogue and transition of this traditional knowledge and practices, we are in a situation wherein there are community members who uh, are unable to adopt or know the language. There are community members who are made feel inferior about their culture and tradition. Now, in this entire situation, I want to build the argument that because of investment, the indigenous peoples are getting away from their culture and tradition, because it is a systemic way of making them away from their culture and tradition. Now, on the contrary, the entire world is saying, wow, indigenous people are the protector of nature. The indigenous people are protecting the environment. Very nice. We need to really empower them. But these are all fancy statements, because if you don't take into consideration this systemic approach of how you are making indigenous peoples vulnerable because of these investment, you there will be no indigenous communities left with the traditional knowledge and practices. And that is how it is very important to address this as a systemic approach, and not glorify the initiatives of indigenous people for the sake of glorifying it, rather than acknowledging the issues. Now, on contrary, I would also like to highlight that we really, when we are talking about sustainable development goals, we need to understand that who and for whom, by whom, and for what is these developments. I strongly feel, and the indigenous community strongly feel, that if these developmental projects have no sustainable benefits for the indigenous communities, there should not be investment in the land of indigenous communities. And having said that, what are the indigenous communities offered on contrary to this extractive developmental projects? They are offered a compensation of money, they are offered a compensation of job, they are also offered a compensation of kind of land. But I want to emphasize and highlight that neither of this compensation is sustainable. Money at certain point will get over. Land which they are giving is not as fertile, or as emotionally the grand ancestral connection is not there. The job which is giving is putting them in a vicious circle of a health crisis. So all these are not sustainable. And also I want to say that, if you take a person's identity from the individual, that person cannot sustain. And that needs to be understand that land is the identity for indigenous people. Now, having said that, I would also like to emphasize that everyone is now talking about do not bail out polluting industries. Yes, it's good, very important, it is the need of the hour. Everyone is also talking about investment in green jobs, which is good, which is very important. But I want to make it a point that not bailing out polluting industries, not investment in green jobs, and rights of indigenous and local communities needs to be seen in a holistic way and not in compartments. Because only when the rights of indigenous and local communities is connected with green jobs, like promoting the sustainable livelihoods and local economies, and ensuring that not bailing out of polluting industry does not give an alternative to another kind of industry which is again exploitative. Like, for example, I would like to put it an argument, which is an example, is that, for example, we are now pushing for solar energy, on contrary to extractive coals or iron ore. But the point which I want to make is that even solar is a land intensive power. So what I want to say, that there has to be just transition. Just because we want to shift to renewable energy, just because we want to shift to solar energy, we do not grab land for making solar, because it will make the same problem which the iron ore or the coal was making. And that is very important to understand, that these all needs to go in a holistic way. And that is why I would like to reinforce and say that indigenous and local communities has to be the core of decision making process. And when I say about system change and not climate change, it is because it all comes down to a system approach, because the laws are made in a top level and it is imposed. I would end by giving in a short example, an anecdote of a story. So I have been visiting villages for my research and understanding situation. So now everyone is talking about green jobs. So also there has been instances wherein compensatory afforestation, that is the plantation drives, are kind of pushed for, and which has also become a way of greenwashing uh, in the name of green jobs. So when I had gone to the field areas, so the indigenous leader said that the community the people had come for compensatory afforestation, and we why did you resist, what was the problem? And then he said that they had brought mango trees, and they had brought uh, jackfruit trees to plant in our areas. And I was like, these are fruit trees. What was the problem? Why did you not let those trees to be planted? And then the indigenous leader said that if they plant mango tree, and if they plant a jackfruit tree in a periphery of the village, the wild animals will come to eat those jackfruit and mangoes, the wild boars, the monkeys, and they will destroy all the agriculture area or agriculture crops in our area. And that is why we do not want these plants. We want plants like sal tree, which is beneficial for us. So the point which I want to make is, I being from the indigenous community did not know about these nuances, because the local level nuances is the local people who know about it. And that is why free, prior and informed consent is very important. And all the policies need to be made from the local level, the community level. And that is why when we are talking about system change, we talk about and push for a system and an institution which are more localized, wherein the policies and decision makings are coming from the communities themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Archana. This has been absolutely interesting and important. I think um, we also speak of parts of what you just said here in Europe as rather just adding supplementary energy sources such as the solar energy to the existing fossil energy rather than replacing and actually changing the entire system. And this is obviously the entire problem of today's kind of, let's say, mainstream environmental policies, because they're just really adding new things to the already existing really problematic system. So this has been absolutely great. I'm not sure if Thomas will speak first or Joseph, so I'll introduce you both, and I'll hand over to you quickly. So Thomas is the coordinator of Young Friends of the Earth Europe, where his main motivation is to support the action of all young Europeans in their diversity for climate and social justice. Together with a network of young FOEE, Thomas works for a deep and radical change in society, for a better, more inclusive society which cares for people, for the future, and for the planet.
O
Then
futuro do planeta. Joseph é um ativista do clima e da paz.
Reset project as well at Young Friends of the Earth Europe. He focuses on the representation of all youths, in particular underrepresented youths, in the development and implementation of the European Green Deal. So, Thomas and Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zeno. Yes, Joseph and I will try to stick to the 7-minute limit, and we'll do our speech all together. And I wanted to start by thanking you, Zeno, and thanking very much the organizers for inviting us. We are very honored to be in this session with other youth organizations. And we would like also to greet the audience in its diversity, coming from all continents, different countries, of different genders, ethnic origins, sexualities, and social and economic backgrounds. So today we'd like to explain how we at Young Friends of the Earth Europe, we address the topic of system change and how this relates with two key concepts which are of great importance for us and for which we are fighting. The first concept is climate justice and the second one is intersectionality. So these two concepts are at the core of our values, and as a consequence, we naturally fight for radical system change, which is the only long-term solution to mitigate climate change and preserve us from its most dramatic effects. We'll try to briefly explain why, and we start with the climate justice concept. So for us, it's a goal. It's the goal to make the fight against climate change and the reaction to the climate crisis as fair as possible from all points of view. So economic, social, political, and since last year, we can also add sanitary. We want to make it as fair as possible for all of us, regardless of our backgrounds, our identities and characteristics. And this is exactly where the second concept comes in, the concept of intersectionality. Young Friends of the Earth Europe, together with its national member groups, work on the concept of intersectionality for many years already. And this is a key concept to understand the climate crisis and implement solutions. Intersectionality makes us aware that all individuals are at the intersection of a variety of identities, such as the race, the gender, the age, the social class, the sexuality, the religion, and many other identities. These different identities grant us more or less privileges and disadvantages. In the context of climate change, we also notice that the climate crisis affects disproportionately and adversely the least privileged people and communities. In the current system on all continents, the most oppressed communities are the ones who contributed the least to the climate crisis. However, they are also the ones who are being hit the hardest. And if you look at the problem globally and generally, we, the young generation, are directly impacted by the current crisis, while we did not contribute much to it. And as young people, we already have to face the impacts of the climate crisis and will be confronted to its worst effects during our lives. We believe that these problems have a common origins. The origin is a capitalist system which is structurally accompanied by a cohort of isms, which reinforce the power of the economy over the population and the planet. Among these isms are different forms of oppression and domination, such as neoliberalism, neocolonialism, racism, sexism, militarism, and many others. It results in a deeply unequal society which preserves the short-term financial and economic interests of a few privileged individuals over the long-term well-being of humanity, life, and the planet. As a consequence, a multitude of struggles and fights are erupting all over the world every day. To a certain point that we believe that the system is too much corrupt to be fixed. Green capitalism will perhaps slow down the exploitation of natural resources. Yes, maybe it will, but it will never stop it. It will never stop overconsumption. It will never stop the exploitation of communities. It will never stop the destruction of the environment. A so-called carbon neutral neoliberalism will continue to benefit from the current structure of social and economic systems implemented by authoritarian regimes and dictatorships. It will continue to oppress the least privileged people because of their genders, their sexualities, the color of their skins, or their religion. So for us, the conclusion is simple. What we need is not the improvement of the system. Painting it in green is not the solution. What we want is a deep system change. And now I will hand over to Joseph, who will explain how we see the intersectional system change in practice and what we do and everybody can do. So Joseph.
Yeah, hi Doma. Hi everyone, thanks. Yeah, I'll try and be fast. So yeah, we believe that we are in a moment that we can realize more than ever right now, together with the pandemic, how broken this current system is, and therefore that we should change it and really move on. But how do we really move on? How do we repair the current multi-layered injustices that we're experiencing? I hear many times that we are the change and that we need to keep changing our behavior and focus on our individual actions. Well, that's one step forward, and it's true, our individual actions are vital. However, let's not forget the historical responsibilities of extractivism and its continuation, and therefore the sheer affair of the rich countries of the global north towards the global south and so on. One way that I could, and I'm trying myself to contribute as an individual, is to live green, but that's a privilege. For example, food, organic food is not affordable for everyone. Plant-based diet could be part of the solution, but how do I even impose this privileged solution, for example, to refugees who have just crossed the Mediterranean Sea and arrived in a racist country where they are locked in so-called hospitality centers without even the essentials? And how do they even experience the consequences of climate change in these tents along with the other oppressions? On a different note, as an Eastern Mediterranean person, I live in an isolated island. And if I want to use any sustainable transportation, I just can't. It's just not possible because I don't have any choice. I need to get a flight to go anywhere else outside of the country. Or if we focus on energy, even if we shift the energy sector from fossil fuels to renewable energies with the same capitalistic logic, then the electricity will not be affordable for everyone. And they will destroy part of the nature to other PVCs unless we democratize and decentralize energy back to the communities. So as a conclusion, all these issues are interconnected and we need a holistic approach to tackle them. At Young Friends of the Earth Europe, we strongly believe that building an intersectional environmental movement is absolutely essential. What do we mean by that? It means that we understand the climate crisis and other environmental battles in relation to other social struggles. Why is it important? Because it helps us to analyze the systemic oppression and how different groups are affected, and then we understand the mechanism. But also it helps us to see how many different struggles for justice are interconnected and require solidarity between the movements. If we are not intersectional, then we allow oppression in the climate justice movement. We will not truly achieve just solutions. We need to include everyone and everyone's struggle. We are all the same boat. Therefore, we have one struggle and one fight, the existing system. So we need to educate ourselves. We need to actively listen everyone's experiences and struggles. We need to embrace diversity, create spaces to include everyone. We need more compassion and less competition within the movement. Everyone is welcome and everyone is needed. We all have our different and important role in the movement, our strengths. A lot of times I'm hearing the question, are we lacking of imagination? I would say that what we need is a common vision, a vision which is created by everyone. And at the center of it are the most marginalized young people whose voices are not heard in the current processes. We need to create joint movements and take collective actions to support each other's struggle, which is the driving force to dismantle the current system. This is a social pressure for a change that comes from a bottom-up approach, a change that starts from us, our communities, and it decreases from a local level to an international level. To achieve that, at Young Friend of the Earth Europe, within our project system, we're trying to bring organizations from different backgrounds together that emphasizes to the most affected voices to be heard and build strong collective visions for a socially just and ecologically sound future. And lastly, we're using the current institutional frameworks and tools such as Green Deal to ensure that all of us, and in particular young people from underrepresented communities, are part for the decision-making processes to build a narrative of a future that we want. We need a change that everyone can feel, not just the privileged ones, a truly just system. So system change will be intersectional or it will be bullshit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph and Thomas. Yes, I mean, you put on the table so many different issues, but I think what really is very crucial, and I think also that most of today's youth environment movements are aware of it, is that it is extremely important actually to remain critical also of domination and power structures within our movements, to be fighting together, but still taking time to really rethink how are we organizing, who is speaking, who is not speaking, who is maybe excluded from our movements, who is not, etc. Absolutely. So we'll turn to the fourth speaker already. Her name is Aoife. Aoife is a 16-year-old climate activist who began as a school striker protesting in front of the Scottish Parliament. Since then, she's been an event coordinator for MOC COP26, really great name, I think, an event engaging more than 800 young people from 141 different countries. Aoife Mercedes is also a spokesperson and youth representative for the COP26 Coalition, a collective of organizations who are mobilizing around the postponed now due to the crisis COP26. So Aoife, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for introducing me, and also thank you so much for having me here and inviting me. I'm really grateful, and on top of that, it's been fantastic just to hear what everyone else has had to say, and I cannot emphasize and echo enough what has already been said. And I think just building off a little bit on what Joseph was saying in terms of like the Green New Deal, I think as someone, you know, living in the UK, I think there's quite a massive emphasis on that in terms of how we can move forward. However, having said that, I feel like again, it has been mentioned, of course, but also like those historical impacts and implications from colonialism, and also the kind of transition from that profit-driven capitalist system, and then, well, in essence, you know, it's that economic system that, again, as has been mentioned before, needs that change, and from the simple premise that it's based on this constant economic growth, and as we know, it's completely unsustainable, and as we know, well, again, we need those radical solutions, we need those huge changes, and again, linking, I guess, back more to the youth movement in terms of our approach, I guess I'd like to speak a little bit on the kind of dynamics between youth in terms of our involvements with adults, in terms of how we are able to approach various different stakeholders in terms of, like, you know, our own personal relations with politicians, but on top of that, also our relations with people who are in those decision-making places. And it's a difficult one, because often what we're trying to do can overlap depending, you know, what we're fighting for, who we're fighting for. And I feel as though I really do want to emphasize that importance in unity in what we're doing. But again, with regards to those huge changes, regards to that systemic change that we need, the approaches, they tend to vary in terms of how, you know, how we're going about this, because it's really difficult to work within a system that is already built, you know, on oppression that's already built to kind of go against you and what you're doing. And so it's really interesting to see this kind of balance that's being created, and also these dynamics which occur when you're trying to kind of change a system within the system. And so I think from my experience in the campaign Teach the Future, which focuses on climate education and focuses on systemic change, it's again interesting to see how people approach that, because there are these varying ideas that kind of tend to oppose, and, you know, often people go to the, you know, more extremes, I think, of like, well, again, of actually being able to implement something that is a lot more long lasting, that is, you know, outside of this capitalist system. And it's those kind of things, and then on top of that, having to work with people within said system. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I think it's continually kind of growing, developing, and continually learning on that. And then again, when actually, you know, looking into the depth of said education, of looking into how we would talk about that, they're really, again, that word intersectionality, I think, is really key to everything I do, at least, and everything that I, you know, bring it into the work that we do in terms of this movement building, in terms of these different campaigns, events, etc. And again, like, it goes beyond the science at this point. You know, it goes beyond just achieving, you know, climate justice. It's about that social justice, again, about those different intersecting oppressions, about how, you know, like, as someone who is, it's really interesting, because again, I think back to how I've spoken to people internationally, back to how even within kind of, I feel like often, you know, again, it links back to this legacy of colonialism, where we almost compartmentalize different regions and how dynamics are even between them. So of course there's the kind of quite contrasting dynamic between that global and global north and global south, which I'd rather acknowledge as being MAPA, so most affected people and areas. And then even within that, you know, again, these different economic statuses in terms of, you know, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and also those relations with gender, those relations with sexuality, again, as was addressed by Thomas and Joseph before. But all in all, I guess the huge emphasis, at least for me, is very much based around how I guess I kind of play into that in terms of, you know, the privileges along with the oppressions, and how they don't equate, and how they often manifest, and then how that's brought into that movement. But I will stop waffling now. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll pass on to you, Zeno.
Thank you, Aoife. We actually have some problems with Brenda's internet connection, but I'll present her nevertheless, and we'll see if it works. So there is a possible replacement here as well for Brenda, but I hope that it will work directly. So Brenda is the climate justice coordinator of La Via Campesina, Southern and Eastern Africa, for more than 3 years already. And she holds a master's degree from Africa University in Human Rights, Peace and Development, and I think is joining us from Zimbabwe. That's at least the country where she's working. So Brenda, the floor is yours. I hope your internet connection will be stable.
Right. Yes, thank you guys. I'm going to speak with my video off because of the internet connection. I've already been dropping in and out of the meeting, but Mateo, she's also on standby, my fellow colleague from LVCCF, yes, and I'm based in Harare, Zimbabwe. So for us, when we're talking about system change and not climate change, it begins with identifying or realizing that a lot of the work when it comes to climate justice is already adversarial with the status quo. And as obviously we strongly believe that our food systems should work and be determined by ourselves as peasants. And this is something we make sure to acknowledge and to share knowledge on through political trainings, horizontal learning through peers, in farmer-to-farmer exchanges. And we also recognize that the industrialized agriculture and the corporate food systems are at the center of the climate crisis. So this is one issue that is paramount and cannot be ignored in discussions about pathways to actually deal with the whole climate crisis. And then the methodology that has worked for us mainly has been mixing theory as well as planning and practice. I can give you the example of the La Via Campesina International Agroecology Schools as a symbol that embodies these three. It is not enough for us to do the lobby and advocacy without any practice to back up our demands. So you find that the International Agroecology School system that was put in place globally, you find there's a school, agroecology school here in Zimbabwe, Shashi Agroecology School is one of those cohorts, and another one in Cuba. So for us, we believe that yes, we need to lobby and do advocacy for system change, but at the same time, right by our actions and our practices that we're doing, such as peasant agroecology, we're already building resistance and offering the alternative to seeing and realizing climate justice within our time frames. So there are several challenges and barriers that we've encountered when it comes to materialization of our principles. So most of these are political barriers to ensuring that public policies support the realization of these principles. These are policy bottlenecks. You find these contradicting policies and corporate capture of the whole climate change discourse or the whole climate crisis. And these in turn lead to or culminate in 4 solutions taking center stage instead of the real solutions that are being implemented by peasants all over the globe. So looking into the future, we've come in to have a strategy that says, well, let's build documentation that brings to the fore the solutions that peasant movements have been implementing. And I can give the example of here in Southern Eastern Africa region for La Via Campesina. We have been conducting research on climate change that clearly documents the alternatives that peasants have adopted. And we've produced the documents. We have a primer, Peasant Agroecology Achieves Climate Justice. I think I'm sure I shared with Todd some of the links, or I can even paste some of those the links to these documents in the chats so that people can also get access to this. And what we've managed to do, realizing that most of the rural communities, normally documentation that comes out is maybe prevalent in maybe the foremost languages that are used. So we've in turn started the process of ensuring that all these documents are translated into the local languages, into the national languages that they are conversant with in terms of also understanding to the larger and broader communities. We've produced videos that bring out the perspective of climate justice from the communities who are at the forefront or will be at the branch in terms of the effects of climate change in the global south. And one also key pillar that we've realized is on solidarity. Solidarity is one of the strongest pillars of any successful movement. And this support and solidarity from others around the globe. So currently we stand in solidarity with peasants in Mozambique who have been suffering the brunt of some of the severe effects of climate change through cyclones. I don't know if most of you are aware, but in the space of less than 2 years, there has been Cyclone Idai, Cyclone Kenneth, and more recently Cyclone Eloise in their work. These cyclones devastate not only crops, but livestock and homes of peasants in the provinces, resulting in loss of life as well as hunger. So these are some of the key issues that we feel have to be brought to the forefront. And if I may add on, I don't know if I've exhausted my time, but one of the key things that has come out from this whole COVID-19 pandemic, the global pandemic, is how unsustainable it is to maintain the status quo when it comes to industrialized agriculture or this corporate capture of the agricultural food systems. It is not sufficient or it is not working. So rather, we adopt the approaches that have been working, where peasant communities are feeding the provinces, are feeding the nations, because you find that the whole close of borders and the whole lockdowns that are happening have in turn or inadvertently exposed this whole fake idea that things can be globalized at such a level that is being implemented by the large capital. I think that is what I have to share. If I still have some time, maybe Matheus, if you have anything to add from our region.
Perfect, Brenda. Thank you so much. So this has been the first round of this conversation. And I think that Brenda has added at least two extremely important elements, which are the international solidarity from one national movement to another national movement. I mean, we know that we are continentally and globally organized already, but this word of solidarity might sound kind of abstract, but as Brenda just said, it is extremely concrete because climate change has very concrete manifestations. If there are more cyclones happening in the southern part of the world, what exactly do European environmental movements do in order to help the affected people, etc., etc. I might start with a first question to Archana and Brenda, but all my fellow panelists don't hesitate to ask questions as well. And I also invite the attendees to ask via the chat, and I'll formulate them to the concerned panelists. So Archana and Brenda, maybe, how exactly do indigenous climate protests and movement relate in India, in Zimbabwe, to rather urban environmental movements? Is there kind of a systematic articulation between urban and rural environmental actions, or are there maybe as well some tensions? Are there different organizations from different territories, or is there kind of a common ground which you share? How is it going? Because basically, I'm asking this question because it's a very important one here in Europe, as there's really a big difference, not only in Europe but above, between urban and rural areas. I would say that the climate movement has been strongest rather in urban areas than in rural areas, but I think that the World Social Forum shows that this is actually not the case in the entire world. So I'd be extremely interested in hearing you on India on this subject. And Brenda, just feel free to add something. Archana, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Zeno, for asking this question. This is indeed a very important question, as well as the need of the hour to have a dialogue on this. Like, as to how are we taking the environmental justice movement, and what are the different scenario in the both the rural and the urban area. So one thing which I would like to put in here across is that one of my observation is that language plays a very important role when we are talking about climate justice movement and action. And for that matter, when I talk about all the literatures about climate change, climate crisis, or climate action, is mostly in English or other language which is commonly accepted in the mainstream media, or in the urban areas. But when we are talking about regional areas, rural areas, indigenous and local communities, the language is one of the major challenges, wherein there has been no efforts put in to penetrate or to ensure that the knowledge dissemination is there. So I think that is one of the aspect which needs consideration and solidarity, and also effort from both the government and the civil society organizations, that how we ensure that there is language justice, because language justice is core to social justice, and it is core to climate justice. Having said that, one of the thing which is my strong which is my observation is that which I feel that in rural areas, people have a lived experience and are aware about it. They may not know that this particular situation or this particular thing is termed as climate change or climate crisis, but they have different connotation and different terminologies for that. Like when I try to explain is that if leaves are falling in a season where it should not fall, and in if the birds are not coming to the agriculture crops in a season where they should come, the indigenous and local communities will know that there is an issue of climate. There is an issue of summer, whether it is heat, whether it is water scarcity, or whether it is windy weather. So all this kind of few uh, symbolic or the traditional knowledge and wisdom is there, which make them realize about the climate crisis which is happening. But at the same time, when we say that this report states that This climate crisis is something which is so and so in English terminology. So then you will kind of pick up that, oh, indigenous and local communities are not aware about climate change, and their movement is not strong about climate change. But what I feel, again, the second thing which I would like to emphasize is contextualizing climate crisis and climate action movement is very important. Like in an area where I come, it is both loss of livelihood because of extractive developmental projects which are causing air pollution and water pollution, and climate action is the movement wherein the indigenous people are involved in. Like they are fighting for the rights for land, they are fighting for a safe air, they are fighting for the forest based livelihood. There are instances wherein indigenous people are emphasizing and reviving the traditional knowledge and practices of sustainable agriculture. So all those things which I strongly feel is that the indigenous people are practicing, uh, but they might not be familiar with the terminologies which we are using it. And thereby one of the thing which I see is that, in urban areas mostly, we have environmental specific movements, like youth groups specifically working on environment. But most often I have seen that in the rural setups there are youth movements, those who are working in terms of social issues, economic issues, and the environmental issues and biodiversity issues all together. Because, again, bringing the point of today's discussion, it's system change and not climate change. So in a holistic way they are already in action and working. What effort needs to be done from our end, which I feel, is to make people realize that they are already doing what people are talking about. And that is why I feel there is a need of solidarity and support and intergenerational and inter-exchange learning of both the urban environmental groups and rural environmental groups, because it is we who have to come together and assert the insights and experience of indigenous people and local communities, and the rural areas movement is very much crucial for the environmental movement. And for that matter, when I say articulation, documentation, and knowledge dissemination is one of the core strengths of the urban environmental movement, and that is the need wherein we need to come together. So I would leave here saying that it is all about solidarity, and second is respecting. When I say respecting, it is very important to understand that we need to go beyond formal education. We need not judge a people because the person is not formally educated or uneducated. They may be formally uneducated by the educational system or structures, but they have a wisdom and knowledge. Like for me, the elderly women in
Sistema educacional. Mas às vezes
knowledge, but she has not formally received education. And that is what is very core when we are talking about environmental movement and solidarity. And the third thing which I strongly feel is very important, as you all said, it is has to be intergenerational, and it has to be intersectionality at the core of entire environmental justice movement.
All right. Maybe to complement what Archana has been talking about, or maybe to give also a different perspective from our take, I will start maybe by agreeing with what you've mentioned, Zeno, around that difference happening between urban and rural climate justice movements in terms of relating. So you find that climate justice essentially has been a urban developed model, but for us, when it comes to uh, the rural part, because most of our peasant movements are based or operate from the rural provinces. It's been particularly important to kind of like have an initiative where we understand and develop our own take and contribution towards the climate justice movement. So in terms of developing long-term solutions for our territories and the world as a whole, we've noticed, or we've gathered from experience and also from learning the principle of present agroecology and the principles that climate justice offers as a very good practical way to think of the food system in relation to climate and climate change. So present agroecology and food sovereignty are able to provide answers to the multi-layered crisis that we are living in, especially in regards to the climate, because they are intersectional by nature.
Yeah, absolutely. This is extremely interesting, and I don't want to add anything to it because it has been very complete. So there is a third friend of the Earth from Finland who would like to ask a question. His name is Ville Veikko. If he wants to turn on his microphone, or she.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you perfectly.
Okay. So my question is to any of the panelists, and that how the system change which you are searching should be related to the concept of nature. And the idea is that as the prevailing system couldn't function without modern science of nature, and is in many ways based on using the Western concept of nature. And as far as the concept of nature has been spreading through colonialism all over the world, so far the prevailing system has been also spreading all over the world. And in areas where the modern concept of nature is still not yet much known or used, there people are living more sustainably. But wherever the concept of nature has spread, the sustainable life have been lost. And now you see one of the main elements through which the commercialization of Earth is continuing to expand is through these so-called nature-based solutions which the transnational corporations are driving. So in this respect, how do you think the system change which you said should be related to the concept of nature?
Whoever would like to respond, Brenda, I see you.
Well, I was going to say, for me, from this last statement where you are saying transnational corporations pushing the nature-based solutions, already there's a question mark. There's a huge question mark for me, because what we know and what we've seen of transnational corporations is that their agenda is profit. They pursue a capitalist model. So it's for me, it brings the question on, is it really nature based, or these are some of the false solutions that have been that are being propagated as solutions to the climate crisis? Because you realize that the adversary, because they've realized there's this huge movement on climate justice, they've also jumped onto that platform and are speaking. I would say essentially they're taking that terminology on climate justice and putting a new twist to it, such that for us as social movements, we need to be very aware and notice the nuances in political terminology that comes out from the transnational corporations. I can give the example of in terms of agriculture, when you're talking about organic farming, already now it has got 10 different meanings or 1,000 different meanings according to who is talking about organic farming. And I would say also the same when we're talking about agroecology. We found that some of the transnational corporations have already jumped onto that bandwagon. So it's very, very important to actually analyze who is giving those nature-based solutions. Are they for our benefit or literally for profit? Because they realize there's so much profit to be made in organic food produce or organic farming or agroecology. They are already also jumping onto that. So it's very, very important for us to realize and analyze whether it's a solution, a real solution, or it's just a solution being propagated for profit again. Thank you.
Yes, Archana, if you just go on. You're having, wait a second. Yeah, I don't. No, perfect.
Yeah, I
Seems
just
that at least 10, you have to try at least 10 times to unmute, but now it's fine.
It's completely fine. Before going on to the question led by Velo, I would like, add on to what Brenda said, because even I echo that. And because it is one of my observation and reflection is that here the indigenous and the local communities always had organic farming, which what people are terming this. They had always been resorted to traditional farming and eco-friendly ways of sustainable agriculture. But after the green revolution and after the polarization of
Isso que não tentava. Depois de um tempo, percebemos a imposição do uso de pesticidas, né, de agrotóxicos, e queremos saber quem foi.
fertilizers and things, indigenous peoples were not that. And over the period of time, you made indigenous people feel inferior, that your sustainable agriculture, your eco-friendly way of agriculture is very uncivilized, very orthodox, and you do not know anything. And these are techniques, fertilizers and science and technology which we are bringing into you for having massive production, cash crop and things like that. Now after so many years, again you come up with concepts like organic farming, which I feel is hijacking the terms of indigenous local communities and coming up with terminologies. And now you are propagating for those concepts, and again making it so high way of living, like which is a costly way of living, that those indigenous peoples are again made inferior, that you do not practicing organic farming. Your way of farming is not organic, even if you're not using pesticide. This is the real way of organic farming. So again, bringing down to this, that how over the years, what I have witnessed and experienced, it is a systematic pushing for adaptation. It is a systematic pushing for a resilience mechanism, which is again a way of more imposition. What I want to share is that the resilience and the adaptation for climate crisis has to come within the communities, and with the free, prior, informed consent of the community. And now, what Vele has talked about, the concept of nature, I, for that matter, needs feel that it is very important for us to understand that what is nature are we talking about, and what is the perspective we are talking about. So I would leave it here to say that for us indigenous and local communities, nature, we are intrinsic to nature in terms of our identity, we are intrinsic to nature in terms of our livelihood, we are intrinsic to nature in terms of spiritual belief. And for us, nature is not a commodity, but our identity. And having said that, I would say that we will never want to commodify nature, which most of the other institution or other groups are trying to. Commodification of nature is something we need to stand for it and resist, because this commodification of nature again is a result of systematic discrimination, colonization and racialism. And that is why I strongly feel that we all need to stand together. And all I feel is important to understand the narratives and perspectives, that today here we have gathered here, learning from each other, sharing our thoughts. And that should be a basis of climate justice movement and intergenerational learning platform.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I absolutely agree, actually. And one problem is certainly that many of our own words have been adopted or maybe misused by, on the one hand, international corporations, and on the other hand, political movements which are antagonistic to what we want. And in this sense, words also change their sense according to who is using them, as you said. So would there either be a next question, or would maybe Joseph or Thomas or Aoife want to continue this reflection? If not, I allow myself to ask a next question. So I think that we haven't spoken a lot about the COVID crisis, which is obviously central now, has been central in 2020, and probably will remain central for at least months, if not years. So my question to all of you panelists is, on the one hand, kind of how did it impact the movements you are involved with? I know that most probably it has been really detrimental to what we're doing. And on the other hand, did you maybe have or make the experience of this crisis actually leading to a higher conscience of precisely the climate problem, of environmental destruction on the one hand? Because, I mean, we all know that COVID is also a consequence, at least partially, of the commodification of nature. Archana is asking me, yeah, again. So now it's working. Thank you. And I mean, taking conscience of the climate crisis because of COVID, what have been your experiences, or is it rather that people actually maybe are focusing on other issues because, I mean, which might be legitimate in some sense, because they're having just urgent financial problems and don't have the time to mobilize on these questions? So yeah, what do you think about all of this?
I would like to put quickly two intervention of mine. So one of the aspects in terms of COVID-19, which we saw, that definitely, yes, the entire globe was under a health crisis, but it was also seen, and there were a lot of evidences that the indigenous and local communities across the globe were not only affected by COVID-19 as in health emergency, but also were affected because of the gross human rights violation which took place across the globe. So, amidst COVID 19, the government and the multinational corporation also pushed for uh, lots of land grabbing and ensuring that there is gross human rights violation. And having said that, I would also like to put it across that lots of nations and countries also, because there was no public communication and people could not come together to resist, there were efforts wherein lot of contradictory laws which violates the rights of indigenous people and local communities, laws which are contradictory to environmental well-being of the country were pushed forward or were passed. And that is where what I feel was one of the major concerns amidst COVID-19 lockdown, that we are in a health crisis and a health emergency, but not respecting that there has been effort to push forward for laws that is contradictory to environmental well-being. And there has been efforts by both the government entities and both by the multinational corporation to push forward for more of land grabbing and resource grabbing. So what I feel that indigenous communities were more vulnerable because they were going through a health crisis where they were not being able to access the healthcare facilities, and at the same time they were also vulnerable because of this entire massive gross human right violation and rights non-recognition of their rights and deprivation of the rights. Having said that, in the context of India, I would like to highlight that one of the observation which I came across during my field insights and my research is that the indigenous and the local communities whose rights over the land and territories were recognized were much more in a better situation than the indigenous and local communities who had migrated to cities. So when I was interacting with the women leader of the indigenous communities, she told me that we are pained to see how our brethren in the cities are struggling for food and shelter, and how they are coming back to villages, but we are here in the village, are very much protected and have food because of the forest gave us shelter and food. And that is how one of my strong affirmation is that in years to come, when there are more pandemics like COVID-19, if the indigenous people's rights over the land and forest are recognized, they'll be much more secure. So in a way, if I see that the indigenous people are more secure in their own areas, in their own territories, which this particular example also help us to understand. And this is just one example, there were many examples wherein the indigenous and the local communities whose rights were recognized were much more protected. And having said that, I would also like to say that the indigenous and local communities members, through their traditional knowledge and practices, were able to be resilient amidst COVID. Like they revived their medicinal plants. Like they used to drink barks of tree, boiling it, which were beneficial to keep them away from cold and cough. They also resorted to food habits and food baskets. Those were very much nutritious and helped them to increase their immune system. They were grinding leaves and roots and drinking it as juice to make themselves immune. And at the same time, they were also ensuring that they had made gates in the entrance of their villages, wherein guarding the villages that no one can enter. And they were also washing their hands with ashes. So all those things which they had resorted to, which also emphasizes that how important it is, the revival of the traditional knowledge and practices, to prevent them from pandemic like this. Having said that, yes, the livelihood was affected by livelihood was affected by COVID-19, because all the market was stopped. And here in India, the COVID-19 lockdown coincided with the minor forest based livelihood of the indigenous and local communities, and they were not able to sell it. So yes, on economic front they were affected, but they were much more resilient because they had food security and safety, because of the rights were recognized. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Archana. Maybe the other panelists would like to continue on these points, especially Eva, as she's been really active in more than one movements directly related to COP26, which has been postponed due to the current crisis.
Yeah, I'd be happy to step in and kind of, well, it's an interesting one, I guess, because of course the COVID-19 pandemic in itself, it's been awful to say the least. And then I guess that very much brought this huge interruption in terms of movement building, in terms of actions being done. I think as someone who very much started off with those youth strikes, it kind of brought a complete stop to that. And so we had to find other methods of actions, of other methods of actually still keeping that movement alive. And so I guess that came in various different forms. I think, as briefly mentioned during that introduction, I did do that kind of mock COP event, and it was kind of meant to be in place of the COP itself, and it was very much focused on youth participation, on youth advocacy, but namely also kind of uplifting the voice of those most marginalized and often just ostracized, which is prevalent throughout previous COPs in the past. And so I guess that was part of us trying to keep that movement alive. But I think a huge thing which has been kind of noted out a lot when I've spoken to various different people is how those actions and that movement building and all of that kind of pressure that was brought upon government, that was brought upon the system in itself, it came from that youth action, because there was very much a lull, and then through discussions with various other kind of activists and other people in say workers unions and kind of these different groups of people, essentially, when you start to have these conversations and hear what they have to say, they very much bring it back to how it brought a light to these actions to a lot of things. And so the pandemic, it very much caused a really huge interruption. But then on the personal level, I feel like there are a lot of other things that go behind it, because when it comes to mobilizing, when it comes to actions, when it comes to things like that, as youth, it's a new way of organizing, I would say. I think it's very it's very interesting, I guess, how it works in terms of our approaches and how they tend to differ. But also on top of that, it very much has a huge impact on mental well-being, and I guess there is that element of crime anxiety and also kind of apathy towards a lot of things, because ultimately, I guess, in the spaces that I work in within like this context, it's very different to that of someone who's essentially fighting for their life, in the sense of how the impacts are a lot more direct on them than it ever will be on me, or at least for now, at least until future. So in that sense, our own approaches and our own mindsets, I feel as though a huge part of that is just kind of unlearning. And so what that time did provide was a lot more focus on, instead of just doing these actions which often don't always seem to be grounded in like a proper purpose, it was very much a moment of reflection. It was very much a moment where we could see how we're going to be working within these spaces, how it's actually going to create an impact, the significance behind what is social justice, what is climate justice, how do these come together, and then how does then that link back to this this line of system change, not climate change. And actually, it's now I think about it, it's the thing that's on my placard that I bring to every strike, because I guess, like, personally, I have like it's a really huge emphasis, but again, my own personal approach to what that means is it's very different, because it comes more from like an outsider perspective to some extent, but also within that, there are those intersecting oppressions, there are those elements which are brought upon me as an individual, but to different extents in comparison to others. And so again, I guess the pandemic was very much a moment of learning and unlearning, and also grounding what it really meant to be doing this, grounding what it really meant to be, bringing about systemic change. But yeah.
Yeah, great. Absolutely, I really agree. A citation of Hannah Arendt just came to my mind, and she once said that acting without thinking is not acting in the end. So this is absolutely crucial to reflect on what we actually mean by what we say, and how could we speak differently. At the same time, at the European level, there is, of course, all this debate ongoing about the European Green Deal. And I know that Josef is working on this, probably Thomas as well. So there has been the question of the articulation of this idea by Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, with actually the COVID emergency issues. I, of course, have a critical position towards this Green Deal, and I hope that Josef, or maybe, as I said, Thomas as well, could provide us with some more details on what you're doing. And yeah, thank you.
Maybe I can start, and then Thomas can continue. But before we go to the European Green Deal, I would like to briefly comment regarding the pandemic, because I didn't manage to say my comments. So yeah, I would say that in this health crisis, as we have seen it, again, the priorities of the governments and the politicians were to recover the economy, and we have seen that the health systems were not able to, they didn't have the capacities to react, and there are slow reactions and so on. And then regarding the sort of solution, the vaccines, how they have been blocked by the global north again, and when they will be accessible to the global south and so on. So this sort of illustrates also the reaction to climate crisis as well, and all the overlapping privileges and etc. So it is really important to acknowledge these inequalities within the pandemic, and how it reflects to climate crisis as well. Yeah, this is just a brief comment. And regarding the European Green Deal, so yeah, we believe that it is quite important that we have these frameworks and let's say legal base that we can bind the governments and the politicians to really act on the climate crisis. And they have lots of aspects within the Green Deal with all the pillars and so on. And we have been talking about these issues for quite decades, many people and activists, indigenous people and so on. But we are seeing it now in a policy level. And we know that if we allow the system to continue as it is, and we don't really participate democratically, but actively participate and be heard in these processes, then nothing is going to change. They're going to continue with the same logic, business as usual. And we're not going to have the just transformation that we actually need for our societies globally. So what we need to ensure, and what we're trying to do as a movement, is to collect all the visions of people. What do they want to see in these tools, and how do we really use these tools to change the system? And the question for me is not really only on the Green Deal, but rather how do we build a movement which will cover all the movements, that they will come all together, and how do we build the power to use these tools? And perhaps apart from the European Green Deal, we can talk about the need of a global Green Deal. So that's my brief comment on that. I don't know if Thomas would like to add anything.
I agree with what Joseph said, and as Joseph said, the ideal of a Green Deal is something that I think we can collectively agree on. Is something that in the principle, in the concept, in the ideal that it represents, is something very very good for people and for the planet. So yes, indeed, this is something we talked a lot about before, and now that is coming into policy documents, we have to take our role in contributing to it. And just to give an example of what we do in Young Friends of the Earth Europe, is we try to consult and to involve all young people, including and in particular the people who are the least privileged. Yeah, once again, it brings us back to the concept of intersectionality, but making sure that all the people, like the people who are the least heard in the public debate, can also give their can express their voice, and that we can transmit it to the political level and make sure that this will have an impact. So this is what we do, and we do it with the aim of changing things. And yeah, we also organize events often, and we hope that also some people might join us in the future for these events. So we managed to collect as many voices as possible.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Joseph and Thomas. I see that in the meantime, even a dog has joined our discussion. But next, we have with us Leo Gabriel, who is a member of the International Committee of the World Social Forum, and he's been active in and for this forum for a long time, and he wants to ask a next question, I think.
Well, Uh, uh, First of all, I wanted to congratulate you for this excellent panel because it is sort of what we always dreamed about, a change in generations and also a change in focus point because it is not only the indigenous as a movement, it reflects indigenous people. I myself, I'm social anthropologist, as a culture. And it's first hand, it occurred to me, wow, we are speaking about system change. We have to change our system, but uh, do you have to change your system, or isn't the answer for the system change question lies in the culture you are representing in India and Zimbabwe and so on? But still, there is a question I have in my mind, which is given that there is this big contradiction and we cannot dream about that tomorrow all the bad companies will disappear and the indigenous people are getting their land back and so on. Given the fact that that is not likely to happen, how do, did you change or are you changing uh, your within the framework of your culture uh, mm, uh, uh, in the sense of creating a sort of a resistance and I hate to say the word revolution, but it needs another kind of organizing if you face the enemies in such a direct way. And how is that happening? And how is that happening? And how are you changing and coping with this situation of intrusion of, let's say, the white culture in yours?
Can I respond?
Of course.
Yeah,
Joseph.
thank you so much. This is really a very thoughtful intervention and question. And I'm really very happy because this also puts me to thought like, how can we go ahead or what are we doing? So, one of my reflection has been is that I think the entire climate justice movement has come as a ray of hope for the indigenous and local communities because many years down the lane, when we were talking about rights recognition, when we were talking about a revival of traditional knowledge and practices of the indigenous communities, I don't think so it was being heard or it was being accepted in such a way as it is accepted and acknowledged today, because it is currently linked with the entire climate justice movement and environment movement. And thus I would say that this climate justice movement has come as a hope for the indigenous and local communities to assert for the spaces and to assert to get the rights over the land and forest, because that is the core for them to able to contribute back towards the climate action. So this is my first perspective which I would like to share. And the second perspective which I would like to share is that when the entire globe is now talking about not bailing out of polluting industries, and also talking about a just recovery and just transition and investment in green jobs, I feel one of the way of approaching the system change is that if you have to abide by the global community's demand or this global solidarity, which is talking about just transition or green recovery, we need to demand to the government entities and say that indigenous peoples are your allies, young people are your allies to do this, and you need to take them into consideration and you need to make them part of your policies and decision making process. And for you to believe that indigenous people, local communities, and young peoples are your allies, we have been engaging in documentation of the initiatives. We have shown you the creative initiatives of the young people, and we will continue to do so. So I think this is an approach which can be adopted to emphasize that to assert for our decision making spaces meaningful participation on basis of the evidence of the work which we have been doing and the documentation which we have been doing. And the last and the third thing which I feel like how do we need to approach is, I think it is very important also to negotiate and try and put an effort. We do not know whether we will able to do it or not do it, but try and put an effort to decolonize the mindset when now everyone is talking about climate action and climate justice. If now we can link that how climate finance and how economic models and how the entire policy making framework is very much core to climate crisis and very much core to climate action, I think that even the policy makers will be bound to hear. And for that, what I have felt over the years about the youth movement is that the youth movement have come so boldly and strongly that it is now amplifying, the numbers are amplifying now, youth are joining the movement, which also gives them a thread that it is uh, now I think climate action has become a political agenda, like political manifesto. And that is what I think which is one of the element which has to be has an influential part, which I feel that every policies or decisions or government for that matter depends on the youth and for the voting. And now everyone is slowly and gradually becoming aware about this, so all we feel is to enlarge this movement, ensure that this movement is getting more stronger and stronger. So this is what, positive note, hopeful note, we would like to approach it.
Thank you very much. Just in order to be sure, a follow-up. Um, do y- does this mean only a change of consciousness within the indigenous people, or is it also a political alliance with not an indigenous people, which is the thing that gives you hope?
I think so. Alignment with non-indigenous people is also one is the much more greater hope, because I think this is specifically I would take it in consideration with the youth movement. I feel youth movement has been very considerate and open. Is what I have felt in terms of green environment movement, because the perspectives of indigenous peoples, the struggles of indigenous people are being heard by the young environmentalist movement and group and are also being accepted. And that is why I feel it cannot be only through indigenous people, but solidarity and alignment, alliance with the non-indigenous people who abide or you who understand and respect those perspectives is very important.
Thank you very much.
Maybe Brenda, who I say it again is part of La Via Campesina, which is a very important movement, would like to add something.
Okay, thank you, Zeno. I think my contribution on that, in terms of the word that Leo didn't want to use, revolutionizing. For us, we felt that, like I mentioned before, that for us, the methodology has to be theory, advocacy, but also action. So already in terms of the peasant movement, we're looking at implementing peasant agroecology, which for us is in direct contradiction in most cases with a lot of the state policies, government policies that are prevailing. You find that most here in the global south, I would speak maybe for Southern and Eastern Africa, you find a lot of the state policies are guided or are swayed by the need to attract foreign direct investment. So they always have this leeway for free trade agreements where global corporates come in and push their products, whether it's GMO seed or fertilizers or inputs like that in terms of farming. They are going to be pushed by the government, by the ministry. So already this is in direct contradiction to what are the homegrown solutions that are being implemented by peasants. So the idea of the agroecology schools, the farmer, the horizontal learning amongst farmers is proved to be what is key in terms of building that resistance. To say what you are talking about, what you are saying, what you are telling us, oh, these ideas of climate smart agriculture, oh, these ideas of RED, they are not the solutions that are working for us. This is what we are doing on the ground. So unfortunately, the discourse in terms of policy changes is going to be probably a protracted and long one, because in as much as everything is going on, the governments the national governments still have that element of wanting to attract investment from the global north, which is their main driver. But we feel like the movement in terms of this last year, where you've seen the global pandemic that's hit everyone, has proved in some sense it's been an eye opener for most governments in terms of the idea around importing. You'd find that maybe in countries like Zimbabwe, they buttress or fortress importing chickens from Brazil or importing maize from somewhere else. And this is something that could not be done because most of the borders were closed. So now they had to look inward to say the communities that have been farming, that have been keeping livestock, are the ones that are at the forefront now, because they are going in there to get the produce that has always been there. And for us, this is kind of like a shining moment where we're saying, this is what we've been saying. Our homegrown solutions, what we are implementing, peasant agroecology, is able to sustain in terms of food production, enough quantities that can actually feed communities.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Brenda. So we've got 1 minute left for this session. As all of you know, this is kind of the second round of this afternoon here in Europe, evening in India, afternoon in Africa as well, session. So it will continue by an assembly, which will start in 60 minutes. I'm sending the link to all of you right now. If you want, and if you have the time to join it, it will consist of kind of bringing together the different discussions we're having now at the 4 parallel sessions. Marco Ulvida, who's organizing this, had a question on the forum our movements should take in order to succeed, in order to implement the change we want to see. I think that Brenda and Archana have already somehow responded to this question right now. I don't know if Aoife, Thomas, and Josef would want to express themselves on this point. Maybe Marco would like to formulate the question in a more precise manner than I just did. As you want.
Thanks. If I may come in, but maybe I just leave it hanging that we don't because the time is sort of up. But I think that would be one sort of agenda for us to think more on organizing, because the majority is clearly with us. Nobody wants the climate to go astray or the biodiversity to shrink, but there's no force at the moment that would prevent it. So I think in the coming, tomorrow in the assemblies or tonight, in 15 minutes in the assembly, I would pose this question, and then for our next meetings. But from my behalf, from the organizing team of the ecology space in the forum, I would like to thank all. That it was really a rich panel, and I'm so happy people have joined from faraway places. That this is really now a benefit in this onlining, that we can, without traveling, get very different perspectives and views, and also for giving the youthful energy that the movement really needs. And thanks for Zeno and our interpreter for hard work during the session.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to Danielle, who I see is interpreting all of this. So if Aoife and Josef and Thomas, as I say in French, agree, I think we could conclude this session by these words by Marco. I invite you again to join the assembly, which will start in now 12 minutes. And I hope that all of you enjoyed it. I found it extremely interesting, as you said, Marco, to hear from actually 3 different continents, the perspectives that they have on similar questions, or maybe the same questions. So thank you very much, and see you.
Sorry, one more proposal from me, that if we put the cameras on to get a nice group photo to document this special session.
And Marco, is the link for the assembly the same one we are in right now?
No, it will be a new one. It will be a nice one with breakout rooms. So I hope we will be making it more interactive then. All right.
Can you put down the link, perhaps?
Zeno has done it once. Zeno, can you do it again?
Yeah, again. I just sent it again.
I can do it as well. Yeah, it's a Zoom link that should be accessible to all. Thank you.
Marco, do you want to count down?
Taken. All right.
Okay.
So good break from Tampere, Finland.
Thank you. And have a
Thank you.
And shine on, Indian farmers.
Yeah.
Shine on, Indian farmers.
I agree, Ville-Veikko.
Shine on, India.
Ville-Veikko, I want to see your face.
I don't have face anymore. It was some years ago, it disappeared. After that, I don't know where it is.
You don't have camera?
No, I don't have camera. I don't have laptop. This is an old machine and there is no camera in this machine.
Oh, okay.
So let's do some mischief and send Ville-Veikko a camera.
The next time we will ask to the Campesina to organize a Mystica, also if it's virtual, but I think that we can have something very,
Brenda,
very touching.
Yeah,
and
but I can keep this on.
Brenda, you don't need nature anywhere. You will realize if you think it. You don't need any nature.
But we can still have Mystica if anybody wants to do song or poem or something. I mean, this Zoom can be here. There's no rush to close it.
Archana, I like to congratulate. You were very good. Be ready for the follow-up work in India.
No, CVP, the UN Secretary General, of course.
What you can do, what I can say is, if it's possible, just to close, just a second, I ask, that is fantastic that we open this this window inside in the social forum that, as you know, is going a little bit disappearing now. We're restarting, we find energy, I think, and it's a long process to arrive in Mexico, where we hope to meet all each other. And we have Glasgow, we have many of these things, so we have to use, I think, this platform, so virtually, to continue to meet. And I know that there are many other, but we have to use it, I think, because at the end, after 20 years with many problems, we are still here, and with young people. And so I say, globalizemos la lucha, globalizemos la esperanza. Ciao.
Leo, you counted one young lady yesterday for follow-up, day before, from India for the follow-up work. So now you have another also in Archana. So make your list carefully. It will be a big list, very promising.
Perfect. Thank you for these closing words, and I wish you a good rest of the day.